Hello, Michael here from Small Robot Studio with another Blender tutorial. Today we're going to be having a look at how to get started with Renderman 24 for Blender 2.92. Make sure you're on the correct version, and if you haven't already seen the installation tutorial, that was the previous one released. So if you don't know how to install Renderman and get it started, make sure you go back and check that out. This tutorial is just showing you how to get started with lights and shaders and get into rendering some stuff, because I'm sure you are just dying to do it. And hey, make sure you're subscribed with notifications on, otherwise you may be missing out on the many tutorials that we're releasing for free each week here on YouTube. So let's start off here. We've got an object in the scene which is actually comprised of several objects, but that is fine. What I'm getting at here is how to assign and adjust shaders. So if you just want to follow along, you can quite happily do so by using some cubes if you like, but we're going to use this Porsche. So the first thing we're going to do is put a light in. So we need to add a pixar rectangular light. This is your standard directional light that you'll use in Renderman, similar to what you would have called a area light, I believe, in Cycles. So we're just going to get this into place here, something like that. And just remember that your lights and their relative size to your object will define the softness or sharpness of their shadows. So having a smaller light relative to the size of your object will give it relatively sharp shadows. We're going to increase the intensity to 100. That should be enough for this scene. And we're also going to put a floor in. And just scale that up. Let's quickly set up our render settings before we begin here. So the first thing, obviously, set your renderer to Renderman. We're going to be using render to Blender. We can also render to it, which I will cover at the end of the tutorial. Our renderer is RIS. If you have the commercial version, you'll be able to use XPU as well, but don't worry, I'll just be covering RIS in this particular one. All our render settings we're going to keep as standard for the moment. I'll cover render settings in a separate tutorial, but these to start out with will do the trick, so do not worry about that. Lastly, we're just going to set our resolution to 960 by 540 because we do not need to work with a high resolution image for this particular tutorial. And finally, I'm going to split the viewport like this, and I'm going to add in the shader editor just so I can work on my shaders here. We already have a camera in the scene, so I'm going to hit F4 and move to the camera. So now I'm always looking through the render camera for all of my adjustments. So you'll notice here on the right hand side of the viewport, we get this Renderman tab, and this will have all our basic functions. I've already added a light using it. We can use it to also add a shader. So we're going to scroll down, and to selected objects, we're going to add a new material, and this material is going to be a PXR surface. Do not confuse it with the Pixar layer surface. That's a different thing. I'll cover that in a separate tutorial. And we'll just separate it from this principled BSDF rather, that we're not using. What we're interested in this is the Pixar surface, and we'll just render it by scrolling back up and making sure our render is set to Blender and just clicking IPR. Interactive Preview Render is what that is. Okay, so you'll see that the car is now rendering up. We've got a nice diffuse black color for our car, which isn't quite what we're going for. So what we're going to do is, with diffuse selected, we're also going to select primary specular. And then down the bottom here, we've got primary specular face color. We're going to change this to white, and essentially what that acts is kind of like a gain. It's actually the face color, so we could change this to say something like red, and it will give you red specular reflections. Generally a gray scale value is what you're looking for physically correct specularity, unless you're doing something that is a conductive metal. We've also got our diffuse color here, which I'm going to set to a lovely red and ensure our car is a little bit faster because it's red. So look, that's looking kind of cool. We do have all this nasty reflection coming off the ground. The ground isn't particularly exciting. It doesn't even have a Renderman shader assigned to it. And that is something to bear in mind. You should always be using Renderman shaders on all the objects in your scene. So let's assign one to that by using the same method, add material, Pixar surface. And we're going to pretend that this is also a sort of a glossy black sort of like a waxed ground. So what we'll have here is a diffuse color of pretty much black, and we will have primary specular. We'll set this primary specular color to white, but we'll also adjust the roughness here. So if we run that IPR, you'll see that we've got this sort of reflection happening on the ground here, and that looks pretty good. I might increase it to say 0.35, maybe 0.3, maybe 0.25. I think that kind of looks good. But what that has made me think about is the specular reflection roughness of the car, which I think is much too high. So we'll set that to 0.1. There we go, we're going to get some sharper specular reflection now. Alright, that's looking pretty good. So now let's do the glass of the car. So same thing, add material, Pixar surface. Like I said, it's worth pointing out that the Pixar surface pretty much does it all. It's going to be your go-to shader for everything, apart from maybe hair or volumes. Those are the two other types that you might be using. Pixar layer surface if we're doing more complex building of shaders. The other shaders that you can see there, you're not going to really use as much, particularly Pixar Disney BSDF. I thought that was deprecated, but maybe they've brought it back for 24. I'll have to investigate that further. But for the most part, you're safe with Pixar surface. So let's get the glass sorted out. We do not want diffusion on the glass because it doesn't diffuse light really. We do want it to be glass though. So we'll enable glass. We'll enable the refraction gain, which is the amount of light that is going to be able to pass through the material, and the reflection gain, as in how much reflection there is going to be. The refraction color we can also adjust, and the glass roughness we can also adjust, just like we did with the specularity of the previous. So we run the IPR again, and what you'll be able to see now is that we can see inside the car like so. We can also change the refractive index, which I think should be something like 1.3 for glass. That's a bit better, so it's not bending the light as much. And you'll also notice that nothing inside the car has been subdivided, because I wasn't expecting it to be that visible. So why don't we hide my shame by changing the glass refraction color to something a bit darker, like tinted glass. We probably don't want to do too much with the roughness because that would start to make it look like frosted glass, which generally you don't want to drive around with frosted glass unless it's very cold in the morning, in which case your windows might be frosty. Alright, so that's pretty good for those. Now we need to do, let's do the tires for the car. So we'll stop that IPR. We're going to select all the tires by holding shift and clicking on all of them, and then we will add a material. We're also not going to be able to see these tires very well because the light is not pointing at them, so we'll just shift it over a touch and point it out in at the front left tire, and we'll zoom in here. Alright, so off the bat, not too bad. We will now adjust this. We'll use the material properties tab here on the right. You can use the shader editor, which is my preference, just generally because of the way I work, but you can use it here just the same. So we've got diffuse. We want to also enable primary specular, and I'm going to set the face color to be sort of like a mid-level gray, and we'll increase the roughness a little bit. So it kind of looks like the tire is just being sort of waxed and cleaned up and detailed. I'm going to change that color of the tire to be a little bit darker. That's better. Generally, we're just trying to avoid being 100% black or white with the diffuse colors of things in general. Now, if you're looking to do something metallic, and this car has a few metallic parts, these rim parts of the windows there, and this internal rim here of the headlights, and we'll make the rim of that wheel there and the other wheels as well metallic. Not a big fan of metallic rims, but just roll with it for the moment. We'll add the material, Pixar surface again. So again, diffuse and primary specular. So the way that metallic works in Renderman will be slightly different to what you're used to in Cycles perhaps, where you've got a metallic gain slider essentially. The way that you can think about it, particularly if you're using a map, is just to invert the colors. So if you've got black on one diffuse color, on the diffuse color, there's specularity be white. So if you've got a if you've got a metalness matte, you'll just invert it and send it to the opposing lobe. So if it's like black and white and gray into the diffuse, set an invert node, send it to the primary specular, and you'll get a pretty metallic look. Because I don't have a metal texture set up for this, because I was just using the standard shader, we're just going to do it as a simple inversion. So we'll set the diffuse color to black, and we'll set the primary specular color to white, and the edge color to white as well, which will just help the metalness. So the edge color is just the light that is hitting the edge of whatever you're looking at, perpendicular to the camera. So if I was looking at it this way, it would be the light hitting it from the right hand side there, say on the side vision mirror, for example. So paying attention to this part here, if we run the IPR again, you can see we're getting a metallic effect. Very difficult to see the metalness in it because we don't have any other things in the scene, so it's not really reflecting too much. But we could add in maybe a touch more roughness if you wanted, say 0.35. Might be a bit too tinny, 0.27, something like that. Yeah, doesn't look too bad. Doesn't look like we assigned it to this. And I haven't been naming my shaders, so it will be the last one that I used, but we do want to go through and name these shaders as we work. It will make our lives a lot easier. Don't do what I do, do as I say. Alright, we'll create 2 more materials for this car very quickly, and then we'll get into the IT previewer. So we just need a plastic material for the plastic areas of the car. It's kind of a black plastic. So we're going to add Pixar surface. We're going to have primary specular. The face color is going to be sort of a mid-tone gray, and the color is going to be a dark gray. We'll run the IPR, and it's a pretty, if I look at this part here of the bumper, in real life it's pretty like rough. So something like that will give us the effect that we want. We'll assign that same shader to the wiper blades as well. I'm not going to do the badges because I would have to do some texture mapping there, and we're not going to cover that in this tutorial. We'll cover it in one tomorrow maybe. And there's a few bits and bobs around the car that I could also do, but just for the sake of brevity, we're not going to do that. The last thing I just want to do quickly here is these indicators, because they kind of look interesting. So again, Pixar surface, and we are going to have no diffuse, glass, and we're going to have the refraction gain set to 1, reflection gain set to 1, and we'll just get a nice orange color. And the roughness can say be 0.25. Ideally, I would have a map on this as well for like normal, or even bump normal, or even a map for our roughness. So there you go. You can see that the indicators have got that nice orange transmission to them now. So everyone should be able to see where you're going. Okay, so last thing I'm going to do is run through the IT previewer, which is a handy little tool, particularly if you're using more than one monitor. I've just set my light up a little bit different here because that's a car. We should shoot it like a studio portrait for a car. So generally they have these massive diffuse box lights over the top. And what we're going to do is change our IPR to be the IT previewer. If we're doing our final render, we could also do the same thing, change it to IT. Which generally I'd recommend. I'd recommend it over the Blender final render previewer, just because I think it's got a few functions that are quite useful. So what we'll do is we'll hit IPR, and it's going to pop up a window for us. Okay, so here is our render coming up now, and you'll notice that the color is all out of whack. So first thing we need to do is just change our image color space to sRGB. That is the sRGB that you'll be seeing through your monitor. If you wanted to display it and preview it for linear, if you have a linear monitor, which is fairly unlikely, then you could do that. However, for the most part, you're going to be wanting to have your image color space set to sRGB. Linear workflow is something I'll probably cover in a separate tutorial, though. I think most people are going away from linear nowadays, and we're sort of moving to ACES, which is probably something I'll have to cover as well. And you'll see we've got our final image here. And if I stop that using the stop button, we can start a new render. And let's say I change the color to blue for this one and run IPR. So we've got a different colored portion, that's all well and good. And we've got this thing on the left hand side here, which is hotkey C. And I know how much Blender users love hotkeys, so that's the hotkey. But for everyone else that has got difficulty remembering things, you also want to look under Window, Catalog for C. A couple other things that you can do there as well is Inspector on the right hand side if you want to see some of the render settings and the length of time if you were doing a final render. You can see that there, but I'll cover that in a separate tutorial again. The other thing that I want to show you is the split window button here. So I can have this image here of the blue one on the right, and then selecting this window on the left, we can switch back to our red one, and we can look at them side by side and get an idea of which one we like the most. This is great if you're look deving and you just want to do a little bit of tweaking and see backwards and forwards as to what looks better. Super handy, and I use it all the time. Other things that we have available to us in the It previewer is denoise. So if I hit denoise, it will use the optics denoiser on whichever window is selected. So now you can see the difference between this and this. Denoise, I could actually go and have the same image up on one side, denoised on the left and not denoised on the right. So this is great for doing some quick denoising if you just want a single final image like so. Looks quite nice. We'd probably want to render to a higher sample rate, but again, I'll cover that in a separate tutorial. Now, if you're happy with your image, we'll say, hey, this one on the left here doesn't look too bad. Could do with some work, but we'll just get along with it. We're going to export this file. We're going to export it to the desktop, and I'm just going to call it Porsche. And you can select the file type. I'm using a JPEG. Don't do this. JPEGs are terrible. If you're using AOVs, you could use an EXR, or you can use an EXR without AOVs. They've got options for that now. That is a new feature in 24. That wasn't in 23. So that's fantastic. We can hit save. Then we can go to our lovely desktop here. You can see my desktop, very exciting. And we can also look at this new image here that we've created and zoom in. Obviously, I rendered that to a low resolution, and you can change the resolution just into your render settings before you do your final image. But generally, I would render on a low resolution when you're look deving things, because you're just trying to get the idea of balance of colors and things. And that is also something worth pointing out as well. Just before we head off here, we can go window here, we can close that split. We can actually preview all the RGB colors in it, and particularly, most importantly, is the luminance value. Higher, you can see the connections and the settings for the most part work very similarly as they do for Blender, so you'll be able to get a bit of a start there. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. That's it for this tutorial. If you found it useful, make sure you leave a like so other people can find it, and if you haven't already, make sure you subscribe, as we're bringing out CG and illustration tutorials every week, just like this one. Become a patron and access tutorial assets, bonus content, a private Discord, and more by clicking the link below.